Hiuboo Kyosuke joined the army in order to use his abilities to help humanity. However, his most trusted superior soon became convinced that Hiuboo would destroy the world and decided to shoot him. Hiuboo, after surviving, decides to form a criminal esper organization called Pandra and destroy the world. Espers are people with superpowers who are classified according to their strength. There are hundreds of thousands of level 1 to 3 espers worldwide. However, only 3% of espers can reach levels 4 or 7. Hiuboo is a level 7 esper who also happens to be the strongest in the world. Our story begins with a young boy named Hiuboo Kyosuke boarding a boat bound for Japan. He meets Tsubomi, a wealthy researcher who worked with his father, when he arrives at his destination. Hiuboo's father recently died and expressed his desire for his son to live with his ex-colleague in whom he had the most faith. Fujiko, Tsubomi's daughter, is introduced to him. She quickly befriends him and takes on the role of an older sister, making him feel more at ease in this strange new country that will be his new home. However, she also decides to demonstrate to him that he will never feel alone by making his luggage float. We see Hiuboo writing a letter to his deceased father after moving into Tsubomi's house. Fujiko appears in the room, floating, and takes the letter from him to read. Hiuboo, embarrassed, uses his powers to steal the letter from her, surprising her because she, a high-ranking esper, couldn't even suppress his power. The Japanese military, accompanied by Tsubomi, soon enters the room and invites the new siblings to join their new esper special unit. They explain that they want to use Esper's abilities to benefit the world. Hiuboo is intrigued by Captain Iji's proposal but requests some time to consider it. Hiuboo recalls his time with his father while lying in bed at night. His father was a well-known esper researcher who used to experiment on his wife. But one of those tests backfired, and she died as a result. He began to mistreat and ignore Hiuboo because Hiuboo, who inherited his mother's powers, desired to help others. His famous last words to Hiuboo were for him to live as a normal human rather than as a living military weapon. Nonetheless, after reflecting on his father's words and the possibility of helping the world, Hiuboo makes his choice and joins the special unit with Fujiko. 1 year later, they are in an accident with a naval officer, forcing the army to talk about disbanding the special esper unit. However, Iji proposes a wager with the naval army. He proposes that the incident be forgotten if one of their espers can defeat Zero, Japan's brand new fighter plane. Iji selects Hiuboo to represent the ESP unit in combat with the Navy fighter because he has the most potential. But he struggles with training for the upcoming match because his father's words keep returning to haunt him. One of his teammates tries to give him tactical advice on how to use another weapon in the match, but he refuses. Noting that every fighter plane has the same weakness, the cockpit, he only needs to fire his weapon once at the pilot's head. His deadly eyes terrified his colleague. On the day of the duel, Hiuboo discovers that the pilot representing the Navy is the same one who was involved in the incident. The match begins, but Hiuboo struggles as his father's words replay in his mind. However, he recalls Iji's words about him having a gift for saving people and overcomes his fear. He avoids the attacks of the fighter plane and wins the duel by shooting the cockpit. Just then, 3 dolphins appear and communicate with Hiuboo and the others via ESP, pleading for their help as a US submarine pursues them. A torpedo kills one of the dolphins. With the help of the Navy fighter, the ESP unit is able to save the other 2 and repel the pursuer. However, before leaving, the dolphins warn Hiuboo of a terrible fate that awaits him and his companions. Years later, following the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Hiuboo pays a visit to Iji, the person he most trusts, and the latter informs him that Japan will surrender and that the majority of the ESP unit has been killed. Iji, on the other hand, has a premonition that Hiuboo's powers will eventually destroy the world and decides to end him there. Iji shoots him twice in the chest before inserting a bullet into his head. Hiuboo miraculously survives and rises, instantly killing Iji in return, while swearing vengeance on the ordinary people who had betrayed him and his friends, and decides to form the Pandra organization to achieve his goal. After a few years, Hiuboo had advanced to level 7 Esper and was the strongest in the world. Over the years, he's honed his ESP skills to the point where he can perform teleportation, hypnosis, fire, and a few other feats. We see him, who now has natural white hair, annihilating an entire army before surrendering to the authorities. He must wear a school uniform while exercising his right to remain silent and joking. He is then transferred to a special Esper prison. Hiuboo meets Andy Hinamiya, an Esper prisoner with no discernible special abilities, upon his arrival. After causing a commotion, Hiuboo offers Andy the opportunity to join Pandra, and both are placed in solitary confinement. The cook slipped some drugs into Hiuboo's stew during lunchtime, but he notices and gives Andy the drug stew instead. Andy is unable to defend himself during a brawl with another prisoner due to the drug's effect. He takes several punches to the gut before passing out. He then awakens in a surgery room and is liberated by Hiuboo. who informs him that the prison is being used as a site for illegal Esper experimentation. They travel together to the location where Ejiri, a young Esper child, is being held. To attack them, the jail warden sends a monster created by combining various Esper body parts. It appears to be Esper during the early stages of the fight, with Hiuboo even managing to strike down. Hiuboo notices a glimpse of Andy's power during the fight. He then deactivates his limitation, allowing him to unleash his true power and eventually kill the beast. Finally, the three manage to flee and are picked up by other Pandra members, and Andy is welcomed aboard the ocean liner ship Catastrophe at their base of operations. Andy, on the other hand, manages to be alone and reveals himself to be a spy sent to infiltrate the organization, contacting his superiors. It's been a week since Hiuboo rescued Ejiri. Hiuboo informs the team that Andy possesses the ability to neutralize all Esp, and that being near someone who possesses Esp may cause symptoms such as migraines, nausea, or toothaches. Magi is wary of Andy because of his background issues and the fact that they cannot read his mind with their Esp powers. But he can't concentrate on the investigation because Pandra has a new mission to smuggle some weapons. They meet Carlo, a mafia boss and Hiuboo's friend from WWII. He notices that Hiuboo, despite being over 80 years old, still looks young because he uses his Esp abilities to regenerate himself and look young. However, the mobsters with whom they intended to trade began attacking Pandra before the negotiations could begin. Hiuboo directed Andy to shoot Carlo if the signal is given, but he is unable to fire when the signal is given. Knowing this, Hiuboo hypnotizes Carlo's guards into killing each other. Carlo's head is then severed, revealing it to be a robot. Despite this, Hiuboo finds the real Carlos, who is a high-level Esper because he can launch an assault on Hiuboo from across the street. Hiuboo, on the other hand, quickly removes his limiter and dispatches him. Hiuboo then applies a limiter to Andy's Esp negating abilities, making him more vulnerable to mind reading. Magi requests that Ejiri read Hinamiya's mind, but Ejiri refuses unless instructed by Hiuboo. Minamoto and Sakaki meet several Pandra members and Hiuboo at a party hosted by Sophie Grace, Princess of Monarch, for international aid organizations. Minamoto is the commander of the Children, a special Esper team formed by Babel. The team consists of 3 level 7 Espers who work for the government to provide homes for Espers, making Pandra their adversaries because Hiuboo wishes to establish his own government. Minamoto and Sakaki approach Hiuboo and his group, but they manage to flee unnoticed. Sophie is later discovered to be missing as well. Sophie is revealed to be in Pandra's custody as part of their efforts to protect the princess from an assassination plot at the request of Ejiri. Meanwhile, Sakaki and Minamoto interrogate the authorities and attempt to access the data on a USB flash drive stolen from Hiuboo's pocket. Sophie befriends Ejiri and decides to accompany Andy on a city stroll. Hiuboo uses his hypnosis ability to trick their adversaries into falling into a trap by giving them incorrect information about her whereabouts. Meanwhile, the princess arrives at an abandoned orphanage and remembers meeting Ejiri as one of the orphans fostered there before mysteriously disappearing. The mastermind of the assassination plot discovers them and wishes to kill her for protecting Espers. Nonetheless, Minamoto, who had identified the adversary by studying the papers, quickly takes the police with him. The criminal shoots at Sophie, but Andy protects her by taking a bullet to the shoulder, and Hiuboo disarms him before he is apprehended. Despite her promise to look after Ejiri, Sophie stays with Hiuboo and the others and bids her farewell. Andy is exploring the ship as the Catastrophe approaches the coast of Japan, as ordered by his superiors. The ship is suddenly attacked by members of Babel, who send the children aboard. Hiuboo pursues Kaoru, their leader, on his own. They begin fighting, each attacking with a barrage that appears to be evenly matched. Meanwhile, AI and Shio capture Andy after stealing the ship's master key from the squirrel, and using it to breach the Catastrophe's central computer. Kaoru realizes their goal has been accomplished and stops fighting Hiuboo. He then returns to the ship to check on his team and reassemble it. After reuniting, the Pandra members launch a counterattack. Andy uses his second Esper power to temporarily deactivate the powers of anyone he comes into contact with, and subdues Fujiko to remove the hack's control. Simultaneously, the rest of the group distracts the children. In a desperate attempt to contain the Catastrophe, Kaoru, AI, and Shiho combine their abilities with the triple boost feature of their limiters. Nonetheless, Hiuboo repels them by activating his limiter and overwhelming the triple boost. Hiuboo then deploys a field, allowing the ship to float in the air and flee using spatial movement. Magi, Momoji, and Yo entrust Andy with accompanying Ejiri when they are called back while the Catastrophe is being repaired. Meanwhile, Hiuboo sneaks into a Babel medical center to have some tests done on his body. Back at the catastrophe, a birthday party is planned for Hiuboo. Almost every member gives him a gift, except Andy, who claims he didn't know about it and promises to bring something next year. This prompts Hiuboo to consider his medical results, which show he has a limited amount of time left to live. Hiuboo informs the others that their next mission is to steal a brand new ECM device manufactured in the United States. Andy then sends a message to his superiors outlining Hiuboo's next steps. Minamoto's squad ambushes Hiuboo and the others as the mission begins. Kaoru, who had just learned about the catastrophe's impending destruction, stops Hiuboo and declares that she will capture him. Hiuboo attacks Kaoru with full force, knocking her out. Meanwhile, Andy takes advantage of the situation to complete his mission, which is to steal the ship's defensive mechanism known as Ichigo. Hiuboo is stopped from going to Andy's location by Kaoru, and despite his exhausted body, he uses his full power to deal with her, knocking her unconscious. Hiuboo then discovers Andy in front of Ichigo and claims he always suspected Andy was a spy. But now he is forced to assassinate him. Andy uses his abilities to disable Ichigo's cloaking device, exposing the catastrophe to a US military attack. Minamoto confronts Meiji and the others after learning about the situation from them. He then explains that Babel's true goal was to capture Pandra in order to halt the onslaught, allowing them to flee and help Hiuboo and the others. While Hiuboo is occupied fighting off dozens of battle drones dispatched by the US Army, a task team breaks into the ship and imprisons Ejiri. Instead of shooting, Andy attempts to persuade his boss not to take her. However, Andy's superior betrays him, shooting him in the chest and fleeing with Ichigo. Andy awakens soon after to find that the bullet had been stopped by his limiter, leaving him unharmed. Meanwhile, Hiuboo begins to suspect that his body is nearing the end of its life. Before passing out, he uses his last remaining strength to annihilate the enemy fleet in a single motion. The catastrophe, however, is sunk after one more shot, with everyone aboard having left the ship except for Hiuboo and Andy. Andy rescues Hiuboo from drowning, and Babel arrives to assist them both. Fujiko and Sakaki transport Hiuboo to the Tsubomi estate for treatment, while Abaru extracts and destroys the US transmitter chip from Andy's body. Shiho holds Abaru back and asks where Hiuboo is on Kaoru's orders. Andy persuades the girls to accompany him. When they arrive at the mansion, Hiuboo inquires about the man who spoke to them on the catastrophe. Andy confirms Hiuboo's suspicions that the man is Ig Saotome, who for some reason is still alive. Sakaki informs the girls that Hiuboo is dying, and Kaoru offers him some of her blood in order to save his life. Ig intends to use both Ejiri and Ichigo to put an end to the Esper revolution that Kaoru and Hiuboo are planning. Hiuboo eventually leaves on his own, despite the fact that he is still not fully healed, and accepts Andy's offer to accompany him. The two then leave to confront Ig and reclaim Ejiri. They go to Andy's old contact's house and force him to accompany them to the facility where Ejiri is being held. The agent, on the other hand, manages to inform his friends about them in secret. They arrive only to discover that Ejiri is no longer there, and after a brief conversation with Ig, who reveals his intention to use her to kill Kaoru. When Andy and Hiuboo are ambushed, they struggle to escape until the enemy catches them, but Meiji and the others are able to save them in time. The Pandra members reassemble. Hiuboo realizes Ig's next target is Norman Green, the newly elected mayor who supports Esper protection measures, so they travel to New York. They find Ejiri when they arrive. The team sets out to find her, but she defeats Meiji, Momoji, and Yo while in a trance. Andy finds her and follows her to the site of Green's inauguration, but is stopped by police. Fortunately, Minamoto and Sakaki appear and rescue him. They inform him that they are collaborating with the city to foil Ig's plot to have the new mayor killed by an Esper, and thus change the future. Andy manages to stop Ejiri from attacking Green, but she instills a hypnotic trance in everyone else in the area, sparking a riot. Except for Andy and his friends, who were unaffected. As the riot spreads throughout the city, Hiuboo appears and approaches Ejiri to free her mind. But her hypnosis forces him to confront his own delusions of the past. As a result, he unleashes his powers despite knowing that doing so could kill him due to the state of his body. Hiuboo's powers begin to rampage after successfully rescuing Ejiri, so he begs Andy to take her away before his powers destroy him. Andy, on the other hand, is unmoved and uses his skills to control Hiuboo's abilities in order to save his life. Hiuboo eventually meets Ig, who begs him to kill him because all of his friends have been arrested. But Hiuboo refuses and instead chooses to punish him by erasing all of his memories. Andy decides to forge his own path in life after a brief discussion with Hiuboo and bids farewell to Pandra's members. This was it for today. Subscribe to my channel to watch more recaps.